In Tragedy, a true crime podcast, we discuss missing persons cases, violent crime, and other sensitive topics that may be difficult for some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Our show is a place where every story matters and every voice deserves to be heard. To support this podcast, you can subscribe at www.tragedy@truecrimepodcast.com for early access to new episodes. And join our Facebook community, Tragedy, a True Crime Podcast, for updates, discussions, and ways to support the families we feature. Welcome to Tragedy, a True Crime Podcast. I'm Elisa.
And I'm Michael.
Today we're joined by Brandy Guzman, who grew up as Deanna Merryfield's neighbor and childhood friend and knew her during the years before she disappeared from Killeen, Texas in 1990. To understand Deanna's story, it also helps to understand the community she grew up in. During the 1980s and early 90s, Killeen was a city shaped by the presence of Fort Hood, with families frequently coming and going, neighborhoods filled with military and civilian life, and a community experiencing steady growth and change. In our conversation, Brandy shares what she remembers about Deanna as a young person, the friendships, personality, and moments that stood out, as well as what life looked like growing up in Killeen during that time. We'll also talk about what it was like for those around her when Deanna suddenly vanished, and how the loss of a teenager left questions that still remain decades later. More than 3 decades later, Deanna's story continues to matter, not only because of the unanswered questions, but because of the life she was living before everything changed. Brandy, thank you for joining us, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to share my memories of my childhood with Deanna and her family. When I was asked, I was like, no doubt, I will definitely, because it played a big part in my life.
We really appreciate you being willing to come on, and we are very interested in learning from you. So before we talk about what happened in 1990 with Deanna, help us understand your connection to her and what your relationship was like growing up as neighbors and friends.
My family, we had moved right next door. And right away, we kind of all just clicked. My mom had a lot of kids. My mom had 7 kids, and there was a bunch of kids next door. And just from the very beginning, they were just so friendly to us. The twins, Becky and Deanna. Missy was the quiet one. I had a little sister, and we were only a year apart, so we were kind of like twins. So we just, right away, everybody just kind of like clicked together. We were really young at the time. I remember I was like kindergarten, first grade, second grade. I remember thinking to myself, we finally got in a decent neighborhood, because it was a really rough time at those times when, moving, and we had finally gotten a house, a really nice house next door to a bunch of cool, I think a bunch of cool white kids. If that makes sense, like really sweet white kids. Yeah.
You made me think about something actually I haven't really thought about in a very long time. When I think I was in first grade and we moved from one city to another. And the house that we moved into at that time, we actually stayed in almost until I graduated. And one house away was the person who became like my best friend during elementary school and middle school and high school. And thank you for sharing that memory, because that's something I haven't really thought about in a long time. And these are the kinds of people that it doesn't matter if you don't speak to them for years and years and years, but you can get on the phone with them and it's like you never had that break. So it's really interesting how those, I think, relationships are established when we're super young. So what stands out to you when you think about that time with Deanna and her sisters?
What stands out the most is the things that I noticed that now as an adult, I realized nobody was listening, if that makes sense. Nobody was listening at that time. I feel like that's the first thing that I think whenever I think about that time. Nobody was listening. That's the first thought that comes to my mind. And then the second one was all of us just being together. That's the second thought. I remember like literally all of us being together in the front yard day after day. It's the second thought. When we finally started having childhood memories. That makes sense.
It does make sense. When you say no one was listening, what do you mean by that?
There was a lot of bad things happening, there. And oddly enough, that time, Deanna's parents called CPS on my mom. And my mom was worried about their parents because the mom was always drunk. And yet I felt like everybody was kind of saying something at the time, but nobody was listening. Not just to us, it was a neighborhood of where it was like above the bottom, but it was still like there was a lot of stuff happening around the neighborhood, a bunch of bad kids, a bunch of parents doing bad things. And one thing I do remember is kids talking to each other a lot about it, and and bringing it up, and nobody would listen.
This is making me think of my former, I guess my former career. I was an educator for 30 years, and what I know exactly what you're discussing. And one of the things that has changed in schools is now teachers are mandatory reporters. So anytime a minor child comes forward with something, saying something like what I believe you are referring to, that has to be reported. Now, that doesn't always mean that CPS has the capacity to step in, but at least we are doing better as a society to hear the things that I think you're referring to.
It's just a really odd time. I think for that stuff going on, people were getting kids were coming up missing, bad things were happening. I just felt like that's like one of the things I remember.
And I was actually going to ask you a little bit about that. So what was Killeen like in the 1980s and 1990s?
When it was great, it was great. Like I said, we were us kids, the kids, like the neighbors stuff. We were not all the way up the highest class of people, I guess you would make sense, but it was just fun. We made our own fun. That's all I remember, the 80s just being fun. I remember them dressing us like the Madonna look and listening to music with them. That's what the 80s was for me. I was a little girl and they were a little bit older than I was. So the 80s for me at that time, I can remember the good times, that's what they were, just fun with friends.
You talked about dressing up as Madonna. How many jelly bracelets did you have?
The jelly shoes.
We had jellies, Cabbage Patches, the Pat Benatar wing and bangs, the off the shoulder Debbie Gibson Madonna vibe going.
I had that. Esprit. Do you remember Esprit, that brand of clothing? I had so many Esprit shirts.
We had British Nikes, I think, and Keds. Keds was a big thing. Keds and the little flats.
I still wear those little flat Keds. I love those shoes. They're very comfortable for me. So where were kids going? I mean, were there places, I know you were younger, but were there places that the older kids were kind of going and hanging out, or did everybody just sort of stay around the neighborhood?
I will say a lot of the time we hung out right in front of, it was right in between our houses, like in front of their house and my house. But we also would hang out in this ditch, like right around the corner, even as young as I was, because I had an older brother that was Becky and Deanna's age. We would all hang out there and as little as I was, we were being bad, smoking cigarettes. I remember there was lots of stuff. Sex was already, I was already hearing about, because they were teenagers already, and I think, I remember thinking it was odd, but it was literally like, because as soon as they got away from the adults, they were going to be kids, we would go over there, and occasionally we would go to this arcade on Rance here, we would kind of hang out there and do the same thing, smoke cigarettes and just talk crap.
I love the arcades. We had one at the mall. So first you had to figure out how to get to the mall. But once you got to the mall, there was a pretty big arcade over there. And we never really played the games. I guess we just walked around in loops.
All day.
So
all day. Isn't it weird? Can you imagine? Like, I can't stand being in the mall 30 minutes now. I remember being dropped off and staying there like from open to close. We would do the swimming pool as well. They had a station wagon. So, I mean, we would pack up like in this back seat, in the back of that station wagon, and we'd go to the swimming pool and we'd be there all day. That was another place we hung out. Long Branch swimming pool.
You see, with me, I was the nerd in the arcade with both pockets completely weighed down in quarters.
Trying to be like the top score.
Of course.
Wait, what was your arcade name? You had one.
I don't remember. I remember my favorite game. It was Dig Dug.
I liked Galaga. Is that what it was called?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Gallagher, yeah. Gallagher. I like Donkey Kong.
Yeah, that was a good one too. So looking back, did Killeen feel like a place where parents should be worried, or was there more freedom for kids to roam?
Again, remember I said we were like different levels, so I always thought that Killeen was kind of dangerous. I don't know how to explain that, because you see a lot of things. You see a lot of things. I feel like it all depends on how you live and the neighborhoods that you live in. Because I'm pretty sure had we lived in even if we could have in a nicer neighborhood, we probably wouldn't have seen it, been around, you know. So for me, it was kind of like a worrisome place to think, and actually a place that I didn't even want to grow up in, personally. I didn't want to grow up here, Killeen. I thought there was just too much going on here. Stuff was already going on. Then I think at that time, as I got older, that Soul Asylum runaway train, I was like, so many kids came up missing during that time. It was just kind of a weird moment. Like I said, and we were in like a class of people where they're constantly telling you, like, don't talk to strangers. People can pull up on you. And I felt like in our neighborhood, it was more possible. Does that, yeah.
It does. It makes sense. And I mean, something that you just said again has sparked a thought I've never thought about, which is, do I have any recollection of anyone in elementary, middle school, or even high school going missing? And I don't. I can't think of, and I feel like that would stick with me. I grew up outside of the Denver metro area in Colorado, and I don't ever remember that happening. And we've talked to a couple of people from your area who have said what you just said. Kids were going missing during that time. So I don't know, that's just something that sticks out for me, that's not an experience I've had.
I remember, like I said, it just was the neighborhood. I think because after we left that neighborhood, we went to an even nicer one where stuff like that didn't happen. They played baseball out in the street. They're hide and go seek and catching fireflies. It's like I think that's why I said at that time for that neighborhood, it was kind of dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about your recollections of when Deanna went missing. So can you start by taking us back to when you first learned that she was missing, and what do you remember about that time?
We didn't find out until later on that she was missing, because remember, like I said, we left from that neighborhood to like a really nice neighborhood. Like every road started with lake, if that makes sense. So nobody knew. And then one day, one of my sisters had mentioned it, and I didn't believe it, but they had pictures hanging like in Walmart and stuff like that. So we were kind of in shock. But I remember thinking to myself, when I found out, I started crying. My little sister and I started crying because, like I said, she had a twin sister, Becky. So we were all really close. And I remember thinking to myself at that time, like, what happened? Like, why would somebody take her? And because I was already big enough then, I was in middle school, I think like seventh grade, sixth grade. And I was like, why would she run? Why would somebody take her? And then I seen it said that she ran away, and then it started making sense. And I thought to myself, because of that time that I was going in my mental, well, she's lucky. She got away, she got away, from her mom or her family or whatever reason, I didn't think at that time that she was like someone had taken her. I thought she just left. Like she just got brave one day and decided she was going to go make her own life, until just recently, I guess.
So that's always been kind of your thought about what happened until like just within the last year?
Like in the last, because they had said, like someone said that they had made contact with her, you know, um, in my brain, because I remember, like I said, some of my childhood memories at her house when we would go over there, some things that she would say. In my brain, she just didn't want to be at home anymore. When you're a kid, you think everything's the weight of the world on your shoulders, but some things are not. Some things like, yeah, get the fuck out of here. So when that's what she was reported as a runaway. So maybe my childhood brain was like, oh, she got away. She got away, she didn't want to be here. I remember her saying she wanted to run away, like she finally just got away from everything that she was afraid of and tired of. And then all of a sudden it seemed kind of weird after like a few years ago, they finally said that I guess they had kind of given up hope. And then the idea of my brain was kind of thinking like, oh, dang, maybe she is gone. It was a weird time. I feel like in the 80s, they were kidnapping children like crazy in the early 90s. And so that literally for years, that's what I thought, that she just ran away and got away.
Did it feel like people like at school and people in the community were talking kind of openly about it, or did it feel more of like a rumor and an uncertainty?
That's what it was like. Like I didn't feel like it was I've seen when people kick up a fuss in this town over things like that, and I felt like it was just like, because I didn't hear about it till after, and things like that are so important and big. it was just like a rumor type thing that she had just ran away. And then one day her sister talked to me, her twin, and she just kind of like how she remembered, talking to her that night, and then that's it.
Yeah, I think you're referring to what we understand as Deanna going over to the trailer where her sister was. And to our knowledge, that's the last known sighting of Deanna. And we understand that she was very connected to her sisters. And we know that at the time she disappeared, they were all sort of scattered in various places due to what you're discussing. But Deanna seemed to make it a point of getting to her sisters, whether that meant walking or getting rides. And I think that's what you're talking about.
I remember spending the night. My mom would let her spend the night at the neighbor's house, and her parents always weirded me out. But I remember her sleeping. Whenever we'd sleep, she would hover me, like her arms, like making sure like I was so safe, arm around me, leg around me. And if I went to the bathroom, to wake her up, and she would take me to the restroom. I remember her being like that, and I remember her always being a little bit tougher than, Missy was very shy and quiet. Becky was a little. My brother had the biggest crush on her, so she, we were neighbors, and they're boy and girl. Amy, the big sister, like she's the oldest, beautiful, having her own teenage life. And Deanna was just always protective. If we walked home from church, she made sure to hold our hands whenever we crossed a busy road. She was just always like that. That's how I remember her. And at that time, I thought it was kind of odd. But when I think about what she would talk about, not wanting to run away and stuff like that, she was protecting me from something. They were protecting my little sister and I from something. They didn't want nothing bad to happen to us at her house. That's what I finally understood, making it sense as an adult. Like, That's why,
What you are describing to me feels like what we talk a lot about, trying to create a puzzle and trying to figure out what piece. It's actually trying to make a puzzle without having the picture, and, trying to put several pieces together and make some sort of sense of the pieces that you're collecting in your mind. So, I hear you saying, initially the pieces kind of fell together and it made sense to you as a middle schooler that probably she ran away, because you're describing a lot of things that might lead in that way. But then as you got older and learned more, that maybe your understanding of what might have happened changed.
Even when I was younger and it was happening, I knew she was being protective over me, over anything. But when I was little, I actually was thinking to myself, she was probably protecting me from people outside, because remember, a low class neighborhood. I remember there was a peeping Tom, and I had caught a peeping Tom in between our houses. So I was thinking that as a kid. But like I said, then I remember the things talking about watching something, and it was talking about running away. And I asked, would you run away? And she said, I would. She goes, yeah, I would. She goes, wouldn't you? So everything kind of started playing together, as I got older.
Mm-hmm. And did her disappearance change how your parents treated you or other parents were treating kids in the neighborhood that you lived in?
No, it was so small. It makes me sad when I think about it. It wasn't so much. It's like she just ran away and that's it. You know what I mean? Everybody kind of just accepted it because of the rumors behind it, and everything. And it just wasn't. And things, like I said, I was in a neighborhood, things were already happening. Someone's getting raped, or somebody got pregnant, or somebody was drunk off of their parents' liquor. It just stayed like that, in that neighborhood, or even in the, then, like I said, I moved to a different neighborhood. I don't remember it being as bad or anything happening like that in life again, the way it did when I lived over there in that time, at that time period in my life.
What do you think people misunderstand about what it's like when someone close to you disappears?
Because everybody wants to, I feel like everybody gets it misunderstood, because everybody wants to have an opinion. And they lean into that. I feel like a lot of people, like, they go into their own understanding, and then they just go off of that, and nobody really I feel like lately nobody really tries to dissect things. So I'm really glad they do things like this now. I think mostly that's their misunderstanding, is because they want to speculate, or they want to go off of what they think.
Or one headline that they read, or one Facebook post, or something like that, instead of going deeper and framing a good understanding as the best understanding as we can.
It's always interesting to me too, because I was listening to that, and that can be applied at so many different things. And one thing I always remember is one of my mentors a long time ago said that anything that you're saying is things that you already know. And so it's important that you listen, because that's how you learn more.
It didn't make sense to me. When all that happened to it, did I don't know. It was weird. I just figured she just ran away, you know. I tried to lean into what I was thinking, but I was trying to base things off of what I was hearing and what I had read. Because I think I was so baffled too, like how they said, like the uncle making her leave. Why would you make a 14-year-old girl leave from in the middle of the night? You know what I mean? Things didn't make sense, but I told myself I'm not gonna do that. You know, I don't know, you know. So I tried to pay attention to what, you know, but like I said, it just was quick. You didn't see it for a long time until now. Again.
So let's talk about that. What do you remember seeing, and why do you think it's important for people to come forward and speak now?
Well, you know, the room, somebody had mentioned it because we had a lot of friends at that time. And like I said, I had ran into her sister. And I remember seeing a flyer, and that's it. I don't remember seeing, like, you see how Missy, she's like an advocate for all missing children and all runaways. I feel like if people should get involved, especially if it's someone from your hometown or so, you know, and because it could happen to anybody, you know, it could happen to one of your own kids. You know, I feel like people need to get more involved with things like this, especially if it's in your town or in your community. It could really help.
I feel like that's a very important point that you just brought up. We talk about this a lot when we speak to our families and we have our conversations, is the importance of, one, listening, Michael, so thank you for bringing that up, and two, sharing what you hear with local law enforcement, because it is not our responsibility to decide if it's related or important. It is our responsibility to share it. So we are grateful that you are coming forward, and we hope that people who are listening and lived in the Killeen area in the 90s are willing to speak to law enforcement or send in an anonymous tip if they think, you know, they have something that might be related.
I don't think enough people do any of that. I get some people get caught up in their own life, but I don't know, every person is somebody you want to help.
Another excellent point. This is all about humanizing our victims. We live in a society where, unfortunately, it is our belief that criminals are prioritized and victims are deprioritized, and we're trying to change that with this work.
Yes, I love that. Keep going.
When people hear Deanna's name today, because as you said, Missy's been working tirelessly to bring Deanna's name back into the spotlight, and we've talked to several people who are using the term like turn up the volume. So when people hear Deanna's name today, what do you hope they picture?
Somebody's sister, somebody's friend, you know, just see her, period, in general, because she's gone, it's being brought up again, see that this was somebody that laughed with somebody that protected somebody, and she deserves, you know, she deserves peace too. Her family deserves peace. I hope people see that, and to come forward and talk more and speak about this whole situation. Maybe we can bring Missy closer to Deanna and everybody else.
And is there anything about Deanna or about your recollections or this work moving forward that you wanted to share that we didn't give you an opportunity to speak about?
Just so many things I want to say. I know it was such a privilege to have met her before, and to say that I have memories with her. I'm so thankful for that, Deanna. I really am.
You've been listening to Tragedy, a true crime podcast. Our purpose is to honor victims by sharing their stories through the voices of friends, family, and those whose lives were forever changed. If today's episode resonated with you, we encourage you to subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast so these important stories continue to be heard. Together, we can preserve their memories and ensure their voices are never forgotten. If you have ideas for cases we should cover or questions about what you heard, you can connect with us through our Facebook group, Tragedy, a True Crime Podcast, on X at Tragedy Podcast, by email at tragedyaTrueCrimePodcast@gmail.com, or by visiting our website, www.tragedyaTrueCrimePodcast.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope you'll join us next time.